All right, today we are diving deep into a new frontier in financial oversight. It's a world where the biggest clues, the real smoking guns, aren't found on a balance sheet. We're talking about building a database of behavior, a living history of how institutions act, and how that history can actually predict their future. And that's really the core idea, isn't it? It's the central mystery we're unpacking. When a bank starts heading for trouble, the first signs aren't always in the financials. Nope. They're these subtle shifts in conduct, in decisions, in patterns. It's kind of like a detective story. And the clues? They're hiding in plain sight. So Section 1, hiding in plain sight. The big question here is, how do you even find a risk that you can't see in a traditional audit? We're looking for those invisible red flags that the old school methods might miss completely. And this is where our chief investigator enters the picture, the OCC. Their tool of choice isn't just some magnifying glass, it is serious behavioral analytics. They've built a system that tracks millions of actions, turning this huge sea of raw data into a powerful stream of what they call supervisory intelligence. They're basically creating a behavioral database for the entire banking system. Okay, on to our next section, the digital trail. Because, every single action a bank takes leaves a digital footprint. And when you start to follow that trail, a story, well, it begins to emerge. This part is all about the evidence, the specific clues that examiners are now trained to follow. So what are these signals? What are we actually talking about? We're not talking about just one thing. It's a whole collection. Is a bank suddenly chasing super risky loans? Are depositors getting nervous and, pulling their money out? Are customer complaints suddenly shooting through the roof? And this one is crucial. Are managers constantly overriding their own safety controls? Each of these is a data point, another entry logged in the database.
And that is the whole point. One of these signals on its own might mean absolutely nothing. It could just be a blip, an anomaly. But when several of them start happening at once, the database connects the dots, and a story of rising risk really starts to take shape.
There's an official term for this phenomenon, behavioral drift. The best way to think about it is like a bank slowly, almost imperceptibly, steering off course. It's a deviation from its own history, from its own established patterns. And this drift is often the very, very first warning sign that something is wrong, long before the quarterly reports ever show a loss. All right, Section 3, an examiner's questions. So, what happens once the system flags one of these behavioral drifts? Well, this is where we get to the investigation phase. See, the data doesn't just provide answers. It provides better questions. It arms the examiner with a really specific line of inquiry. The first question is all about context. An examiner can now pull up the data and ask, is this bank an outlier? Are they taking on risks that all their competitors are avoiding? This database provides a baseline, a picture of what normal looks like, which makes the abnormal stuff stand out in sharp relief. The next question, it turns the lens inward. The examiner compares the bank's current behavior to its own history. Have they suddenly just thrown their old lending standards out the window? Did they abandon a conservative strategy practically overnight? This comparison is so powerful because it can reveal a huge change in risk appetite, or maybe even desperation. And that leads us to the ultimate question. Are all these little behavioral tics, the model overrides, the funding shifts, are they just a symptom of a much larger hidden problem? Is the bank just trying to paper over the cracks in its foundation? This behavioral data points the examiner exactly where to start digging for those structural weaknesses. So, spotting the problem is one thing, but what you do about it, well, that's everything. Let's move on to how this new form of intelligence translates directly into supervisory action. This is Section 4, from signal to action. Now, one really key takeaway here is that this isn't about algorithms replacing people. Not at all. It's about empowering people with way better tools. The final call still rests on an examiner's judgment, but that judgment is now informed by a massive, real-time database of behavior. It just sharpens their focus, and it sharpens their instincts. So what does this look like in practice? Well, it means examiners can prioritize which banks really need a closer look. They can walk into a meeting already knowing to ask about, say, a huge spike in commercial real estate loans. They can spot a fire when it's just a tiny wisp of smoke. And maybe most importantly, when management says, oh, everything is fine, the examiner has a database full of evidence to challenge that narrative. This wasn't an overnight change. As this timeline shows, it started with small pilots, then it grew into these dashboards that put all the data right at examiners' fingertips. And now, this behavioral analysis is fully integrated into the official CAMELS rating system. That's the core safety rating for banks, and it can now directly trigger enforcement actions. It has become a core part of the regulatory machine.
So what does all this mean for the big picture? Let's zoom out and look at the future of oversight, because this is so much more than just a new tool. It's really a new philosophy.
This comparison, wow, it really captures the whole transformation. We're moving from these static, once-a-year checkups based on old financial data to a totally new model of dynamic, constant surveillance using real-time behavioral signals. It's the difference between reacting to a crisis after it happens and proactively identifying risks to prevent one from ever even starting.
Ultimately, it all just boils down to this one simple, incredibly powerful idea. If you want to know where the real risk is, don't just look at the numbers. Watch what they do. Watch the behavior.
So the next time you see a financial institution get flagged as an outlier, just remember what's behind that label. It's not just one bad number. It's a history. It's a database of every shortcut, every overwritten model, every single customer complaint, and every behavioral drift that led them to that exact moment.